Welcome to The Jeweler's View. I'm Courtney Gray. I've spent nearly 30 years in this industry, running schools, doing custom work, coaching, consulting, and working with makers at all stages. Over time, I've started to see the patterns, the things that actually move a creative career forward, and the things that can quietly hold it back. I built this podcast to cut through the noise, less time in your head or down the research rabbit hole, and more time building something real. Let's get into it. Every jeweler I know has a list, a long one. Finish orders, photograph new work, update the website, post on Instagram, start a newsletter, apply for that show, follow up with customers, organize my inventory, learn a new skill, and clean the studio. And somewhere in the middle of all that is a question. What should I be working on? More importantly, what actually moves the needle? Welcome back to The Jeweler's View. I'm Courtney Gray. Today, I want to talk about priorities, not productivity, not hustle, and not squeezing more into your day. I want to talk about how to figure out what matters most right now. One of the biggest challenges I see among jewelry makers is not a lack of ideas, and it's certainly not a lack of talent. It's not even a lack of opportunities. It's trying to decide where to invest your time, energy, and attention when everything feels important at the same time. I see this constantly inside Transform, and honestly, it's why I built Transform. Someone joins because they think they need help with Instagram. Another person joins because they think they need to work on their website. Someone else is convinced that pricing is their problem. And another thinks, well, maybe I need wholesale accounts. And sometimes those things are part of the picture. But often, after we spend a little time looking at the business as a whole, we discover that they're asking the wrong question. Not because the concern isn't valid and those aren't directions that we may want to go in, but because it's not the next thing. A few years ago, I worked with a jeweler who was spending an enormous amount of energy worrying about social media. Every conversation came back to Instagram. How often should I post? What should I post? Why isn't it growing? Why aren't more people engaging? She was convinced that if she could just figure out Instagram, everything else would fall into place. Then we started looking at where her actual sales were coming from. Not assumptions, not hopes, but actual sales. Almost all of them came from repeat customers, referrals, and people she had already met in person. So the opportunity wasn't more followers. The opportunity was staying connected with the people who already knew and trusted her. A simple email list would have done more for her business than another 6 months spent chasing an algorithm that's always changing. That's what I mean by the next thing. So the next thing isn't always the most obvious thing. It's not always the newest thing. And it's not always the thing everyone else is talking about. Sometimes the next thing is surprisingly simple. Following up, improving communication, photographing work you've already made, collecting email addresses, reaching out to a gallery that you've been meaning to contact for 6 months, finishing the collection that's been sitting half complete on your bench. One of the reasons this gets so confusing is that every task feels important. And to be fair, many of them are. Your website, it matters. Social media matters. Photography matters. Email matters. Shows matter. Relationships matter. The challenge is that they don't all matter equally right now. Imagine walking into your studio and deciding that everything deserves the same amount of attention. You spend 30 minutes on Instagram, 30 minutes reorganizing a shelf, 30 minutes researching a packaging, 30 minutes looking at website templates, 30 more reading an article about marketing. And at the end of the day, you've been busy, but have you actually moved forward? Sometimes not. There's a difference between activity and progress. That's a distinction that took me years to learn. When I owned the jewelry school, there were always 100 things competing for attention. Classes to schedule, instructors to coordinate, students to support, marketing, inventory, events, systems, employees. The list never ended. If I spent my day reacting to whatever felt urgent, I could stay busy forever. But the biggest periods of growth usually came when we focused on one meaningful improvement. And here's the key. We gave it time to work. Not 10 improvements, one. A better onboarding process, a stronger follow-up system, a clear way for people to understand what we offered. Small shifts, big impact, right? That's something I think creative people sometimes underestimate. We often assume that growth comes from adding, from layering, adding another platform, adding another product or a tier of the product, adding another offer, adding another responsibility. And there's a place for all of this, but many times growth comes from strengthening something that's already working. This is especially true when it comes to visibility. Last week, we talked about visibility and whether people are actually seeing your work. Today, I want to take that conversation one step further. Visibility is not about doing everything. It's about helping the right people find you consistently. And consistency requires focus. If you're trying to maintain 5 social platforms, 3 sales channels, 2 newsletters, a website, and a full production schedule all at once, it's really difficult to know what's working. Everything gets a little attention. Nothing gets enough, your full attention. So one of the exercises that we do inside Transform is looking at where attention is already happening. Where are people responding? Where are sales coming from? Where are referrals coming from? Where are conversations starting? Because, like I said, those clues matter. They often tell us where our efforts are most valuable. The answer isn't always exciting. Sometimes the answer is email the people already on your list or in your inbox. Follow up with the gallery owner you met 6 months ago. Update the website page that you've been putting off for months. Ask past customers how they're enjoying their piece. Sometimes the next step is really way less dramatic than we imagine, but it's often far more effective. So here's a question I'd like you to consider this week. If you could only complete one business task this week, what would create the biggest positive change? Not the easiest task, not the most comfortable task, not the task someone on YouTube told you to do. The one that would genuinely move your business now forward. Maybe it's making work. Maybe it's finishing something on your bench. Maybe it's reaching out to people. Maybe it's setting up your first newsletter because you've been putting that off. Maybe it's organizing your pricing system. Whatever it is, one thing, start there. Because the truth is, momentum rarely comes from doing more things. It usually comes from doing the right thing next. The goal isn't to build a business that keeps you busy. The goal is to build a business that moves forward. One intentional decision at a time, one focused effort at a time, and one meaningful baby step at a time. Until next time, I'm Courtney Gray. I'll see you next week. Onward and upward. I'm glad you're here. This path takes a lot, especially when you're building something of your own. If you want to go deeper, I share key takeaways and additional teaching through my email list at CourtneyGrayArts.com. Keep going. This part matters. I'll see you next week.
Singing bowls and stories untold. Yeah, here's to the dreams and how we make them, to howling at the moon, to worries and loss, sitting in solitude, feeling a little bit pissed off. Here's to the grace we have awakened,